All right, so we are going to continue talking about speed painting. The problem with showing it in demos is to refine it takes a lot of time. So I've worked a little bit on this portrait, and I just want to kind of show you the steps. So we started with the speed painting in black and white values, and then we did a color layer simply by changing the layer properties, the blending mode to color mode, and then it matched the values underneath. And then I worked on top of that with an opaque brush, but I realized that the glasses, I was kind of painting the older Elvis Costello with more reasonably sized glasses. And so I flattened all those layers into one layer, and then on top of that, I was able to do what I love with digital painting, which is kind of cut and paste different pieces and rearrange them to get a new proportion. And then you just keep working on top of it with more details. So smaller brush then, kind of build up more textures, more details, and you get your finished caricature. And I guess the only thing I would do to finish this off would be to make the canvas size a little bigger, so this shoulder doesn't feel so abruptly cut off. And then fill in the background again with gray. Remember, this is on a separate layer. We want just an empty background, but the middle gray really helps. And then I might just do a little bit in a new layer on top with my brush at a higher opacity, a little bit larger, stealing colors from myself. And round out this corner a little bit. The less opacity you use, especially with one of these kind of handmade brushes, the more it will look like watercolor. And then there are other techniques you can use as well. There's even kind of a wet brush setting, where the longer you stay on top of something, the darker it gets. So these are all things we can play with. But digital painting, just like traditional painting, it's about putting something down that is shape-based and then reacting to it, working with what you have. All right, so if that's finished, then I simply save it as a PSD with all my different layers. And with that, I can kind of change colors later if I want. And I can even kind of get rid of some of these blocks of color if I like. So you can always kind of keep working with it. But for now, I'm just going to keep softening that. Because I like that warmth added to the background. Okay. So I'll save that. And then, of course, to upload it, you would save it as either a JPEG or a PNG. I guess one last thing, I need little dots on this lapel, since I have them on the other lapel. Now that's the real problem with digital painting, is you can just spend forever on it, right? Just like a regular painting, trying to get it exactly right. And as a teacher, I think that's wonderful. You're just learning more and more. The more time you spend, the better. But as a professional, you have to kind of know when to call it finished and not spend your time foolishly. And that's always difficult. And even though I almost always just use the paintbrush when I'm doing digital painting, I don't like to be distracted by the use of other tools. Don't forget the value of digital art is we have all of this huge toolbox to use. It's really unlimited and gives us a lot of different options. So using clone stamp, if I don't want to change my brush to move dots around, maybe that makes a lot of sense. All right, now I'm going to start the whole demo from scratch. And instead of doing a caricature of a person this time, I'm going to do the animal head to toe. And that's a little bit different because you're not so focused on little measurements and edges. You're focused on the whole anatomy of a creature. And I'm also going to focus on this difference between speed painting and being more analytical, right? But instead of separating them out, I'm going to show this technique where I kind of combine the two. Now, the advantage of being more analytical is that you don't kind of make mistakes of proportion from the beginning. You lay all your basic shapes out, you kind of measure everything, you have the anatomy right before you start actually getting into the painting. Sometimes even just basing it directly off your reference by rotoscoping it on top of a photo. But it can feel kind of boring and stilted. The problem with speed painting is you get right into it, it has a lot of energy, but things like the eyes and the glasses can end up being a lot too small, and your proportions could be off, and then you have to fix them later, right? To actually get the finish you want. So, what I'm going to do is start a brand new file. And I'm going to make sure, because this is still a raster image, that it is large. So I'm actually going to do 14 inches by 19 inches by 350 pixels per inch, which is even larger than our printers can print, but a nicer rectangle. And I'm going to call it my name and digital painting demo. And I'm going to do a bear. RGB color. Okay, first thing I do, make a new layer and fill the background with gray. So edit, fill, 50% gray. Okay. And then I'm going to make a new layer and I'm going to label it sketch. Okay. And now I want to find reference. So I've already found my animal reference I want to use. It's going to be this very cute bear, head to toe, named Laureen. I'm going to bring that in. And because I'm only using it as reference, doesn't matter what resolution it is, but I'm going to make it nice and big on the page. Right. And then I'm also going to open up that reference as its own Photoshop file. So I can steal colors from it and always look at the actual photo. But this time, I'm going to arrange it so they're side by side. And I want this to be my dominant painting, my painting surface, and then this to just be off to the side, something I can reference and steal from. So I say window, arrange, and I'm going to do 2 up vertical. Right? So I have my painting on this side, my reference on this side, and then I can space it so I can see my painting more clearly. And then my reference, I don't need very large because I'm just going to be stealing colors and looking at it. The other tool I want is my navigator up here. And that will be on my painting layer so I can zoom into it easily and move around as I'm painting. Now, why did I actually bring the Laureen sample in here? Well, for this example, I'm just going to sketch my basic shapes right on top of it. And this is what I'm going to do. Make a new blank layer on top, pick a color that's really bold that I can see, like a blue, or maybe for the computer so you can see it, maybe a red. I'm going to use a brush that's fairly high opacity but pretty small, and a shortcut for that is just control clicking or right clicking, and you'll get your size options right away. And I've set my brush settings to have shape dynamics where I'm controlling the size of the brush with my pin pressure. I'm also playing with the angle. I can kind of round it out a little bit. And I can play with what the minimum diameter is. I want it to be able to go pretty small. And shape dynamics is my most useful one. If you want to get to more specific, like scattering events, or we might play with color dynamics this time, working between the foreground and background. But right now, that's just the brush I want to use. And I am just going to start looking at the basic shapes. So big, simple shapes first. So an ellipse for the head, a wedge shape for the neck, another kind of curtain lampshade wedge shape for the torso. The belly is this big kind of egg-shaped oval. It's important to do this when you're doing full bodies of animals so that the anatomy all makes sense. Find where the shoulders are. Make sure I understand that the arm is coming forward here. Separate the hands from the arms, from the joints. And then the crease of the leg, right? So it shows that the leg is coming from the pelvis down here, jutting out, coming back. This leg jutting out to the knee here, coming down, and then bending at the foot. And of course, I can always make improvements on this too. So what do my basic shapes look like? That's what they look like for the whole body. Then for the face itself, I do an action line that shows me the direction of the head down the middle. I do an eye line showing me where the eyes line up on that circle, on that cranium. And then because it's an animal, it has kind of a muzzle shape instead of the mandible underneath. And I want to show the separation in the mouth. Okay, and then of course the ears. And those are coming from behind the cranium line. So those are really the basic shapes I need. I might indicate where the eyes are. Not the detail, but just the shape. But this is just to give me a map. So that's where my bear is, right? That's the analysis. But now I am going to try to do a speed painting. And I'm going to show you a new trick. It's using a brush called the mixer brush. And it's new to Photoshop CC. And what I'm going to do is start my speed painting by actually stealing colors directly from the layer underneath. And so what I do is I click for the mixer brush options. I say sample all layers. That will be all the ones underneath. I can choose my brush. I'm going to go ahead and choose the one I created, right? And I can check its brush settings, make sure they're what I want. So I'll turn on the shape dynamics. And I'll change the size based on pin pressure, because this is different than a normal brush. I'll play with the angle, I'll play with the roundness. Okay, all that's set up. And what is it going to do? Well, it's treating it as a wet brush, about 80%, as a loaded brush, about 75%, and about 90% of it's going to be mixing with the layers below. So I'm painting on a blank layer right here. But what I want to do is pick up color from the layer underneath. So I'll show you what that looks like. So as I start to paint, it picks up colors directly from that reference layer underneath. So if I turn it off, it gives me this. So this is a very fast, effective, but kind of cheating way, right, to give yourself a color palette. And it's not perfect yet. It's a new Photoshop tool. But what it does make you pay attention to is the direction of your brushwork.